So today I'm pleased to say I'm with Dr. Loxton, who's going to talk to me about her work as a marine biologist. So hello, Dr. Loxton.
Hi there, nice to join you.
So first thing I want to know, before we get into what a marine biologist does, what made you decide to become a marine biologist?
Well, it was a bit of a strange one because I actually came to it a bit later in my career. I was working in banking, strangely enough, and I got to about towards the age of 30 and I was like, is this really something I want to do for the rest of my life? And the answer was definitely not. I wanted to do something I was passionate about. So I started thinking about what to do. I loved science and I wanted a lifestyle where I could be next to, on or under the sea most of the time. And I was like, well, that's obvious, isn't it? Marine biologist, that is the way to go. That is where I can make a big difference. I can explore the science side and I get to travel to some really interesting places. So I quit my career, I went back to university and I retrained in that field, and then I worked in that field for 8 years.
That's amazing. So did you have to learn to dive, and how long did that take you?
Yeah, so I already knew how to do basic scuba diving. So I had like my original scuba diving qualifications and my advanced qualifications. But when I decided I wanted to do marine biology, a big part that was important to me was I wanted to be under the water and I wanted to do my experiments under the water. So when I quit my job in banking, one of the first things I did was I went and got my commercial diving license. So I actually went to Madagascar and volunteered over there for 3 months. And during that time, I got my commercial diving license. So when I went back to university to do my master's and start the marine biology actual training, I already had that qualification, so I knew I could do my experiments underwater if I wanted to. So yeah, I did it that way.
So most people who think of marine biology, they think they're going to be swimming with dolphins off the Florida coast. Was it like that for you?
Absolutely not. So some people might say I did marine biology wrong. I think I absolutely did it right. There's a term that we call marine biologists who just want to get involved in the kind of like the big, exciting animal, or as we call them, the charismatic megafauna that people get involved in to like want to go and see the whales or hug a dolphin. No, that wasn't for me. I wanted to investigate and work with the underappreciated, the tiny, maybe the ugly, although actually it worked out that everything that I worked with was pretty beautiful. But I wanted to work on the small stuff, but the interesting stuff as well. So, no, I definitely did not do most of my work in the tropics. Although I did my diving training in Madagascar, which was nice and cozy. From there on in, it was cold to colder to even colder for my career. So I concentrated mostly on what we call the boreal regions, which is like kind of here in our temperate zone all the way up towards the north, and then the polar regions as well. So that was where I did the majority of my work.
And I've heard you've worked in some pretty cool places. So shall we take a look at some video and you can talk us through what you were doing there? Okay, so this is you setting off on what looks like an amazing trip. What's going on here? So
this is me on my way down to Antarctica. I was lucky enough not to have to take the ship because I was only there for the summer months, so I didn't really have the time. So I got myself down to the very south of Chile, to Tierra del Fuego, and then I got a military plane, which is what I'm in here. These are very small planes. You can see the propellers there, and you can see that we're allowed to walk around. This is me up in the cockpit with the pilots, and you can see here as we're flying over Antarctica towards the base. Interesting thing is that this is actually the darkest I ever saw it in Antarctica. This is about midnight. I was there in the peak of their summer, and so I never saw the sunset. This was the closest that I got during this video. But this was my first ever sight of Antarctica, and it was, as you can see, quite breathtaking and spectacular. The base has its own runway, so this is us landing on our own runway here, and you'll see some of the base buildings kind of passing by and our own planes on the side there. And this was the first time that I got to set foot on the continent.
So we can see this is not your normal typical day at the office, so what are you doing here?
So this is actually in Antarctica at the British Antarctic Survey base. And here we've got one of the British Antarctic Survey employees who is lifting the boat into the water. We can't keep it in the water because of the icebergs passing through. Now here we're out on the boat and you can see we're heading to our destination. So all around you can see the glaciers. This is right near the base. And you can see here we are getting ready for a dive. The water is cold, so we have to wear full dry suits which keep our bodies dry. The only part of our face that exposes our faces, but we do have a full face mask, which you can see the guys here wearing as they surface, so they can constantly communicate with the surface. So these guys have just emerged from their dive. This is the kind of ice that we have to deal with as we're navigating around, so you have to be very careful about choosing the spots where you dive, because icebergs can actually move quite fast if the wind is blowing, and they can crush you if you're in its way. So we have to be really careful about where we go in. This is us, I'm not going to lie, collecting a few of these icicles to put in our drinks for later that evening. If you've got an iceberg, why wouldn't you make the most of it? Here we've got a lovely penguin. So this guy, there's quite a big colony of penguins that live near the base, and this is one of them who's been out fishing, got a bit fat, and obviously having a bit of a rest before he swims back. And that's just kind of like what it's like on a typical journey out to go for a dive, really, when you're down in Antarctica.
So being a marine biologist, what was your research all about if it wasn't about dolphins and whales?
So one of the big things I wanted to do in my kind of as I moved into this new career is I wanted to do something that made a bit of a difference and hopefully left a little bit of a mark, made things a little bit better for the world. So I wanted to do work on climate change, and that is what I studied. I was looking at the way that the warming oceans and the acidifying oceans was affecting tiny little creatures that grow in the ocean. So they're called bryozoans. They're colonial creatures. They're made out of calcium carbonate. Kind of think coral, but a little bit less charismatic. Okay, so I was working on bryozoans and looking at how the warming temperatures affected them. The reason that links in with the polar regions is that they are our fastest warming oceans on the planet. So I could study them there and find out how those temperature changes was actually affecting the chemistry of the shells and skeletons of these creatures.
And what did you actually find out?
I found out that as the oceans got warmer, they did change what they made their skeletons out of, which unfortunately also makes them very slightly more susceptible to acidifying oceans. It means their shells are also a bit easier to dissolve if they make them in warmer oceans. But the good news is that they seem to be able to kind of adapt their way through that and kind of carry on in a slightly different form. Hopefully, so long as we don't end up with our oceans getting too warm or too acidic, we should still be able to have this real diversity of life on the planet and under our oceans. But it is also a little bit of a warning signal that we have to be really careful about how acidic we can allow our oceans to get, because a lot of our carbon dioxide in the planet is locked down in these creatures under the sea. And if it gets too acidic, we're going to start releasing all of that as well, and that will really accelerate climate change for the rest of us as well. So we do have to be a bit careful on that.
So when you're actually living and working in Antarctica and you're diving in this ocean that's, you'll be able to tell me how cold it is, what do you have to take into account?
Well, there's quite a lot of different things that you have to consider working in a place like that as opposed to working in the UK. We had to do quite a lot of training before we went over there, obviously. When it comes to the diving, there are a few main things you have to consider. The first is temperature. So it is cold, so we had to limit how long our dives were. That didn't always work because sometimes you're with scientists who got a bit excited. I think my longest dive was about 55 minutes, but I was nearly hypothermic by that point, and they had to put me in a warming bath for a while afterwards. So usually we tried to limit our dives for about half an hour. We had to wear the special layers and everything. Just like behind me here, I was wearing a dry suit, just like this. And underneath I had all kinds of thermal layers to keep me warm, and making sure that I could try and insulate myself from the cold. The other things that we had to take into consideration were things that could potentially kill us. That sounds strange, but you are not top of the food chain in Antarctica. There are other things. And unfortunately, the year before I went to Antarctica, there was a lady there who was studying the same subject as me, and she was killed by a leopard seal during a dive. So there are lots of precautions you have to take. We had to make sure that we had full and constant communication with the surface, so we wore a full face mask so we could talk to the people up on the surface. I'm not wearing one here, but in Antarctica I had to wear one. We also had to dive with a buddy all the time, obviously, you always do, but only one of you could do science at any one time. The other one was purely on guard to watch out for anything that might come along. And if something did come along, they armed us with a 6-foot stick. It was a long pole that we poked anything that was aggressive that got too close. Very technical. The other thing that we had is on the surface, we had watchers with binoculars looking out at all times. The things we had to look out for were orcas, killer whales, because in Antarctica they're quite aggressive, and leopard seals. Leopard seals will think you're a seal and will come after you for food, or a penguin. So yeah, they were constantly looking out beforehand. There had to be no sightings of any of those for half an hour before you went in the dive. They watched permanently during the dive to make sure that you were safe as well. And then the last thing, we were on a rope to the surface at all times. We were roped to each other and we were roped to the surface. So if something bad did happen, they would physically pull us to the surface, which can be dangerous, but we'd rather risk the bends than getting killed by an aggressive whale. They only had to do that to me once, and it was actually to rescue me from an iceberg that was coming in my direction at high speed. So they had to pull me out to get me out of the path of this iceberg, which they grind the whole of the bottom surface of the sea as they pass through, so you don't want to be in the pathway of one of those as they come. So yeah, quite a few considerations that we had to take into account with doing the diving. And of course, you're trying not to think about all of that because you're actually just trying to study the really interesting stuff around you and collect samples and note things down and have big bags of my little creatures grew on rocks. So at most times I was like chugging around about 30 kilos of rocks on my dive as well. So, you know, you've got a lot of things that you're trying to think about all at the same time. But the main thing is you just want to get really good science while you're there.
So the reason I'm doing these videos for my channel is hopefully there'll be young people out there maybe studying for the GCSEs and they don't even know some of these incredible careers that you can do once you've got science qualifications. So how did you end up doing cool stuff like this?
Well, at school I did love science, and so when I did my A-levels I did all 3 of the separate sciences. I didn't do great in them, to be honest, but I did well enough to be able to get into university, a good university, and I did biochemistry and biomedical science as my first degree. Then I had a little bit of a break, as we've kind of discussed, but when I decided I wanted to come back into marine biology, I was able to get straight into a master's course, which is a 1-year course at a really good marine biology university in Edinburgh. I did that 1 year, and then I loved it so much, I decided I wanted to do a PhD. But if anyone else wants to get involved in it, you don't have to go on and do a full PhD. Yes, you do if you want to determine the route of your own research, if you want to choose what you study, but if you want to do loads of other things in marine biology, if you want to work for one of the government agencies that are looking after the oceans around our country, or if you want to work in somebody else's laboratory and work on their research, really you can get onto that with just an undergraduate degree or a master's. It is competitive, I'll be honest with you. There's a lot of people wanting to work in marine biology, so if you can do a master's or an undergraduate which can give you a master's qualification at the end, it will give you an edge to get those jobs that you really want. But yeah, it's a fantastic career. It's really interesting. I managed to travel the world with that, and you're never going to earn £1 million, but you're going to do something you love and you're going to make a difference in the world.
Well, I've certainly really enjoyed hearing all about your stories of marine biology, and it's absolutely fascinating. So thank you so much for joining us today. Thanks very much.
It's been a pleasure. It's been great to speak to you. Thanks very much.